My name is Brielle, I'm 28, and I discovered something that would destroy my family's perfect facade forever. It happened during what should have been a simple family dinner. My parents had just handed my sister Chandler a $10,000 check for her house down payment, while laughing about how I couldn't even afford ramen without that's help. What they didn't know was that I'd been secretly supporting our entire family for 3 years through an anonymous trust fund I'd established after selling my tech startup. As they mocked my failures, I sat there knowing I could cut off their electricity mortgage payments and Chandler's credit card bills with one phone call. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial struggle ever could. But before I tell you how this family vengeance story unfolds, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should support you most? Hit that like button if you felt invisible in your own family. And make sure to subscribe, because this story has twists that'll make your jaw drop. Trust me, what my family discovers about their broke daughter will change everything they thought they knew about loyalty, money, and consequences. Growing up, the dynamic in our household was crystal clear. Chandler was the golden child, and I was the cautionary tale. From the moment she could walk, everything she did was celebrated, while my achievements were met with skeptical questions or outright dismissal. When she got B's in high school, my parents threw parties. When I graduated valedictorian, they asked why I couldn't be more well-rounded like my sister. The pattern continued into adulthood. Chandler dropped out of college twice, changed majors 4 times, and never held a job for more than 6 months. Each time she stumbled, our parents swooped in with emotional support and financial rescue packages. Meanwhile, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through computer science school, started freelancing at 19, and built my first app at 22. But here's the thing about being the black sheep. You become incredibly resourceful. While Chandler learned to charm her way out of problems, I learned to solve them. While she mastered the art of asking for help, I mastered the art of not needing it. By 25, I'd developed a revolutionary logistics app that Amazon bought for $2.3 million. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they considered a failure had just earned more money in one transaction than our father made in 5 years at his accounting firm. But instead of celebrating with them, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to stay invisible. I set up the trust fund anonymously, hiring lawyers to ensure no paper trail led back to me. Every month I funneled money into accounts that paid my parents' mortgage, Chandler's rent, utilities, car payments, and even their grocery bills. I watched my father's stress lines disappear when the mysterious estate settlement started covering their expenses. I saw my mother sleep better knowing their retirement was secure. For 3 years I played the role they'd assigned me perfectly. I drove my old Honda, lived in a modest apartment, and let them believe I was struggling. I even asked to borrow $20 occasionally just to maintain the illusion. It was the ultimate long-term psychological experiment. How would they treat someone they believed was beneath them? The answer was worse than I'd imagined. They didn't just ignore my success. They actively diminished it. When I mentioned small freelance victories, my mother would change the subject to Chandler's latest breakthrough in her influencer career, which consisted of 50 followers and unpaid promotional posts for local coffee shops. During family gatherings, I became the punchline. "At least we don't have to worry about Brielle getting a big head about money," Dad would joke. "She's keeping us all humble." They'd laugh while I served them wine I'd paid for in a house I'd saved from foreclosure, celebrating achievements funded by money I'd earned. The psychological toll was immense. I started questioning my own worth despite my bank statements proving otherwise. There's something uniquely damaging about being invisible to the people who raised you, especially when you're literally keeping their lives afloat from the shadows. But I told myself I was being noble. I was giving them security without the burden of gratitude. I was proving that love doesn't require recognition. I was being the bigger person. I was also slowly losing myself in the process. The breaking point came when Chandler announced she was buying a house. Not just any house, a $300,000 suburban dream home with a white picket fence and granite countertops. The same type of house I could have bought with cash, but chose not to, maintaining my humble facade. Our parents immediately sprang into action, pooling their resources to help their golden child achieve this milestone. They raided their savings, took out a second mortgage, and even borrowed against Dad's retirement fund. Watching them sacrifice their financial security for Chandler, while mocking my supposed poverty, was the moment I realized my noble experiment had become a form of self-torture. The dinner where everything unraveled was supposed to be a celebration. Chandler had found the perfect house, and our parents were presenting her with their contribution to her dream. I arrived expecting another evening of being background noise, but what I witnessed instead was the final straw that would bring down 3 years of carefully constructed lies. The restaurant was one of those upscale steakhouses where the lighting is dim enough to hide your emotions but bright enough to showcase the wine selection. Chandler had chosen it specifically because she wanted somewhere fancy enough for such an important announcement. She'd been dropping hints about life-changing news for weeks, building up the suspense like she was announcing a pregnancy instead of a real estate purchase. I arrived first as usual. Being the family afterthought meant I'd learned to show up early and claim whatever corner seat would make me least noticeable. I ordered a water and scrolled through emails from my investment advisor, trying not to think about how the money I'd made that morning in stock dividends could probably cover Chandler's entire down payment. My parents arrived next, practically glowing with excitement. Mom clutched her purse like it contained the crown jewels, and Dad kept patting his jacket pocket where I assumed he'd stashed whatever financial surprise they'd prepared. They barely acknowledged me beyond a distracted "Hi honey" before launching into speculation about Chandler's announcement. "I think she finally found a man worthy of her mom," whispered conspiratorially. "Someone who can appreciate her talents." I bit my tongue. Chandler's talents primarily consisted of taking selfies and convincing other people to pay for her lifestyle. But pointing that out would only earn me the familiar lecture about being supportive of my sister's different path to success. When Chandler finally swept in 20 minutes late and completely unapologetic, she commanded the room like a celebrity arriving at a premiere. Her dress was new. I recognized it from an Instagram story she'd posted earlier tagged with number "treat yourself" and number "worth it." The irony that our parents had probably paid for that dress through my anonymous contributions wasn't lost on me. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, not sounding sorry at all. I was on a call with my realtor. "Big things happening, people." The waiter approached to take our orders, but Chandler waved him off dramatically. "We need champagne first." "This is a celebration." I watched our father calculate the cost of champagne in his head. The same man who'd lectured me about fiscal responsibility when I'd ordered an appetizer at my own birthday dinner the year before. But for Chandler, nothing was too expensive. As we waited for the drinks, Chandler regaled us with stories about house hunting, each more elaborate than the last. She described touring mansions just for fun, being courted by multiple realtors, and having her pick of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. According to her narrative, she was a sought-after buyer with unlimited options. The champagne arrived and Chandler stood up as if addressing a boardroom. "I have an announcement that's going to change everything for our family." I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about her tone suggested this was bigger than just announcing a house purchase. "I've found my dream home," she continued, pulling out her phone to show us pictures. "It's absolutely perfect. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that's perfect for entertaining. The asking price is $300,000. Our parents oohed and aahed over the photos, passing the phone between them like they were examining precious artifacts. I glanced at the screen when it reached me and had to suppress a laugh. The house was nice enough, but it was clearly overpriced for the neighborhood. A classic case of a seller taking advantage of an inexperienced buyer. But here's the thing, Chandler continued, her voice taking on a vulnerable quality that I recognized as her go-to manipulation tactic. I need help with the down payment. It's a competitive market and cash offers are getting priority. This was the moment our parents had been waiting for. Dad practically leaped out of his chair as he reached for his jacket pocket, pulling out an envelope with the reverence of someone presenting an engagement ring. "We've been saving for this day since you were born," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "We want to help you build the life you deserve." Chandler opened the envelope and gasped, though I suspected the gasp was more performance than surprise. Inside was a check for $10,000, representing every penny our parents had managed to scrape together over the past year. What happened next was the moment that burned itself into my memory forever. As Chandler threw her arms around our parents, tears streaming down her face in what I had to admit was an Oscar-worthy performance, Mom looked directly at me and said, "This is what success looks like, Brielle. Maybe if you'd applied yourself like your sister, you'd be buying a house instead of asking us for gas money." Dad laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the dim restaurant lighting. "At least we don't have to worry about Brielle asking us for $10,000. She knows we'd laugh her out of the house." They all laughed then, my parents and my sister sharing a moment of bonding over my supposed inadequacy. I sat there invisible as always while they celebrated an achievement funded entirely by money I'd secretly provided them. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They were giving away money I'd earned to help my sister buy something I could afford outright, all while mocking me for being poor. It was like watching people use your own umbrella to stay dry, while commenting on how wet you were getting in the rain. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the complete absence of love or respect in their voices when they talked about me. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was their cautionary tale, their reminder of what failure looked like, their proof that they'd raised one child right. As I excused myself to the bathroom, I made a decision that would change everything. The experiment was over. It was time for my family to learn who they'd really been mocking all these years. Standing in that restaurant bathroom, staring at my reflection under harsh fluorescent lights, I felt something shift inside me that I can only describe as awakening. For 3 years I'd been playing a character, the struggling daughter, the family disappointment, the cautionary tale they could point to when they wanted to feel better about their own choices. But that character was about to die. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my banking app, looking at numbers that would make most people dizzy. The trust fund I'd established had grown beyond even my expectations thanks to smart investments and the continued success of my consulting work. The account dedicated to my family's expenses alone contained more money than they'd see in their lifetimes. My finger hovered over the transfer button. One touch and their mortgage would go unpaid next month. Another touch and Chandler's credit cards would be declined. It would be so easy to pull the rug out from under their perfect little world and watch them scramble for explanations. But as satisfying as that immediate revenge might feel, I realized I wanted something more sophisticated. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd lost through their cruelty. I wanted them to feel the same invisibility they'd forced me to experience. I wanted justice, not just destruction. The plan that formed in my mind was beautiful in its simplicity. When I returned to the table, they were deep in conversation about Chandler's house timeline. She needed to make an offer by the end of the week, which meant their $10,000 gift would need to be deposited immediately. I listened to them discuss logistics while formulating my strategy. "You know," I said casually, breaking into their conversation, "I've been thinking about real estate investments lately. Maybe I should look into buying a property too." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dad burst into laughter. Not the kind that invites you to join in, but the kind that makes you feel like the punchline of a joke you didn't know you were telling. Brielle, honey, Mom said with exaggerated patience, buying a house requires a down payment, and good credit, and stable income. I know how real estate works, I replied evenly. I was just saying it might be nice to build some equity instead of throwing money away on rent. Chandler looked up from her phone where she'd been calculating closing costs. Maybe you should focus on getting a better job first. I mean, didn't you ask Dad for money for car repairs last month? I had asked for that money, $50 that I absolutely didn't need, but that maintained the illusion of my date. Financial struggles. Hearing it thrown back at me as evidence of my unworthiness was like being slapped with my own hand. Right, I said, forcing a smile. Silly me. I should probably stick to dreaming. They all nodded approvingly, satisfied that I'd been put back in my place. The conversation returned to Chandler's house, and I resumed my role as the invisible family member who occasionally served as comedic relief. But while they talked, I was working. Under the table, I opened my laptop and began executing the first phase of my plan. I transferred exactly $10,000 from my business account into a separate investment fund, money that would be completely untraceable to my family. Then I opened my legal documents folder and began drafting what would become the most important email of my life. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of their excitement and my careful observations. I memorized every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty, every moment where they chose to exclude me from their celebration. I was building a case, gathering evidence of their true feelings about me. When we finally left the restaurant, they were so high on their own generosity and Chandler's gratitude that they barely said goodbye to me. I hugged them each in turn, knowing it might be the last time I'd feel any genuine affection for them. From this point forward, everything would be performance. Over the next 3 days, I watched from the sidelines as Chandler's house purchase accelerated. She posted constant updates on social media, sharing photos of paint swatches and furniture catalogs. Our parents called her daily with advice and encouragement, treating her like a princess about to be crowned. Meanwhile, I received exactly 0 phone calls. No one asked how I was doing, whether I needed anything, or if I wanted to be involved in the family's excitement. I was a ghost haunting the edges of their happiness. On Thursday, Chandler called a family meeting to make her offer official. We gathered at our parents' house, the same house I'd been secretly paying for, to witness her submit the paperwork that would make her a homeowner. As she sat at Dad's computer typing in her financial information, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the section asking for other sources of financial support, she'd listed our parents as co-signers, not just for the $10,000 gift, but for ongoing financial assistance if needed. They were putting their own financial security at risk to help her buy a house she couldn't actually afford. And they were doing it while mocking me for being irresponsible with money. That's when I realized my plan needed to be bigger than just revealing my wealth. I needed to show them what real consequences looked like. I needed to teach them that actions have prices and some debts can only be paid with truth. That night, I stayed up until dawn crafting the perfect email. It would go out in exactly 1 week, after Chandler's offer was accepted, after our parents had committed to their co-signing agreement, after they'd passed the point of no return. The email would reveal everything: my real financial situation, the trust fund I'd established, the 3 years of secret support I'd provided, and most importantly, the immediate termination of all that support. But the real masterpiece would be the conditions I'd set for its restoration. They would need to acknowledge their treatment of me in writing. They would need to apologize publicly. And they would need to treat me as an equal member of the family for 1 full year before I'd consider helping them again. As I sealed the email in my drafts folder, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: genuine excitement about interacting with my family. Not because I loved them, but because I finally held all the cards. They taught me to be invisible. Now I was going to teach them what happens when someone they can't see controls everything they need. The week between Chandler's offer acceptance and my planned revelation felt like the longest 7 days of my life. Every family interaction became a performance where I knew the ending but had to pretend I was still improvising. I watched them make decisions that would soon seem impossibly naive, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from warning them about the earthquake I was about to trigger. Chandler's offer was accepted on Friday afternoon, sending our family into a celebration frenzy that felt both touching and infuriating. She called each of us individually to share the news, her voice breathless with excitement about becoming a real adult and finally having something that's truly mine. When she called me, I was sitting in my real apartment. Not the modest place I'd shown my family, but a downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and smart home technology that responded to voice commands. The irony of listening to her gush about achieving homeownership while I sat in a space worth 3 times her new house wasn't lost on me. "I just can't believe it's happening," she bubbled through the phone. "I mean, I know I've worked so hard for this, but it still feels like a dream."
Worked hard.
The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Chandler had worked hard by posting Instagram photos and asking our parents for money. Meanwhile, I'd actually worked hard by building a business, creating value, and generating wealth, all while being treated like the family failure. "I'm happy for you," I managed to say, and surprisingly part of me meant it. I wasn't angry at Chandler for being our parents' favorite. I was angry at all of them for making me invisible in the process. Saturday brought a family shopping trip to help Chandler pick out paint colors and fixtures for her new home. I was invited as an afterthought. Mom called and asked if I wanted to tag along since they'd have room in the car. Not because my opinion mattered, but because they needed someone to carry bags and validate their choices. Walking through Home Depot with them was like being a tourist in my own family. They moved as a unit of 3 while I trailed behind, occasionally being asked to hold paint samples or reach items on high shelves. I was useful but not valued, present but not included. At one point, while they debated the merits of eggshell versus satin finish, I wandered over to the appliance section and found myself staring at a refrigerator that cost more than most people's cars. The salesperson approached, probably thinking I was lost, but I surprised him by asking detailed questions about smart features and energy efficiency. "Are you in the market for a full kitchen renovation?" he asked, his tone suggesting he thought the answer was no. "Something like that," I replied, thinking about the kitchen I was actually planning to install in my new house, the house I'd be purchasing with cash as soon as this family drama concluded. When I rejoined my family, they were laughing about something Chandler had said about Brielle probably getting lost in the fancy appliance section. The joke was that I'd be overwhelmed by expensive things, when the reality was that I'd been considering buying the entire display kitchen just because I could. Sunday brought the formal family dinner where our parents would officially present Chandler with their financial commitment. They'd invited extended family, aunts, uncles, and cousins who would serve as witnesses to their generosity and Chandler's success. I spent extra time getting ready that morning, choosing my outfit carefully. I wanted to look nice enough to be part of the family photos, but not so nice that anyone would question where I'd gotten the money for new clothes. It was a delicate balance I'd perfected over 3 years of hiding in plain sight. The dinner was held at our parents' house, with Mom spending all day preparing Chandler's favorite foods. I offered to help multiple times but was waved away with comments about how I didn't need to worry about anything and should just enjoy being a guest. Guest? In my own family. At a dinner in a house I was paying for, eating food bought with money I'd provided, celebrating an achievement funded by my success. The word choice wasn't accidental. It was another reminder of my outsider status. As family members arrived, the pattern became clear. Everyone had heard about Chandler's house purchase and our parents' generous gift. Several relatives made comments about how lucky Chandler was to have such supportive parents and how smart she was to achieve homeownership so young. No one asked what I was up to. No one inquired about my life or my goals. I wasn't just invisible, I was irrelevant. The formal presentation happened between the main course and dessert. Dad stood up and made a speech about family values, hard work, and the pride they felt in Chandler's accomplishments. He presented her with a folder containing not just the $10,000 check, but also documents showing they'd added her to their savings account as a beneficiary and co-signed her mortgage application. "We believe in investing in our children's futures," he announced to the assembled relatives. "When you raise a daughter right, you want to give her every opportunity to succeed. Raise a daughter right." The implication was clear. They'd raised one daughter right and one daughter wrong. Guess which category I fell into? As Chandler stood to accept their gift, she made her own speech about gratitude and family support. She thanked our parents for always believing in her and for teaching her the value of hard work and determination. She thanked various relatives for their encouragement and guidance over the years. She never mentioned me, not once. I wasn't part of her success story or her support system. I was just another piece of furniture in the room. But then came the moment that sealed their fate. As Chandler finished her speech, cousin Jessica asked the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "What about Brielle? Any exciting news to share?" The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to me and I could see the calculation happening in real time. How could they acknowledge me without diminishing Chandler's moment? How could they include me without admitting I might have value too? Mom solved the problem with surgical precision. "Oh, Brielle's still figuring things out. We're just proud of her for trying her best, trying her best." As if I were a special needs child who deserved participation trophies for basic functioning. Dad added the killing blow. "Maybe watching her sister's success will inspire Brielle to aim higher in her own life." The relatives nodded sympathetically, their faces showing the mixture of pity and awkward discomfort that people feel when forced to acknowledge family disappointments. I became a teaching moment, a cautionary tale told in real time. That's when I knew the countdown was over. I couldn't wait until my planned revelation date. The email I'd crafted was going out that night, and by morning everything they thought they knew about their family dynamics would be destroyed forever. As the evening wound down and relatives began leaving, I hugged each of them goodbye, with the knowledge that the next time I saw them, I'd be a completely different person in their eyes. Some would be impressed by my success, others would be angry about my deception, but none of them would ever pity me again. I was done being invisible. Tomorrow, I was going to become unforgettable. I sent the email at exactly 11:47 p.m. after the house had gone quiet and I was certain everyone was asleep. The subject line was simple: "Some things you should know about your daughter." I'd spent weeks crafting those 2847 words, and each sentence was designed to systematically dismantle every assumption my family had made about me over the past 3 years. The email began with financial documentation. Screenshots of my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and business revenue reports. Numbers don't lie, and I wanted them to understand the scope of what they'd missed before I explained how they'd missed it. Then came the real revelation, the complete breakdown of every payment I'd made on their behalf. Their mortgage, utilities, car payments, insurance premiums, groceries, and even the $10,000 they'd just given to Chandler. All of it traced back to accounts I controlled. I'd created a spreadsheet showing dates, amounts, and recipients. 3 years of secret financial support laid out in brutal detail. But the numbers were just the setup for the real message. I detailed every dismissive comment, every cruel joke, every moment they'd chosen to exclude or diminish me while I was literally keeping their lives afloat. I quoted their own words back to them, creating a mirror they couldn't avoid looking into. The email ended with my new terms effective immediately. All financial support was suspended. Their mortgage payment due in 5 days would bounce. Chandler's credit cards would be declined. The mysterious estate settlement that had been covering their expenses would vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. I offered them a path back to my support, but it came with conditions. They had to acknowledge their treatment of me in writing. They had to apologize publicly to the same relatives who'd witnessed their cruelty. And they had to treat me as an equal family member for 1 full year before I'd consider resuming any financial assistance. The final paragraph was my masterpiece. You taught me to be invisible, so I became invisible in the way that mattered most. You never saw where your security was really coming from. Now you'll learn what happens when someone you can't see controls everything you need. I set my phone to silent and went to bed sleeping better than I had in months. The first response came at 6:23 a.m. Mom had apparently been up all night because her reply was 11 pages of single-space text that ran the gamut from disbelief to anger to desperate bargaining. She questioned the authenticity of my financial documents, accused me of lying about my contributions to their expenses, and demanded proof that I wasn't somehow scamming them. Dad's response arrived 20 minutes later and was shorter but more direct. If this is real, why did you lie to us for 3 years? What kind of person deceives their own family? I almost laughed at the irony. They'd spent 3 years deceiving themselves about my worth as a human being, but I was the dishonest one for not correcting their assumptions about my bank account. Chandler's response came last, arriving just before 8 a.m. with a timestamp that suggested she'd been awake since dawn. Her message was pure panic disguised as outrage. I don't understand why you'd hurt me like this. My closing is in 2 weeks. You can't just destroy my dream because you're jealous of my success. My dream, my success. Even in crisis, she couldn't acknowledge that her achievements were built on my foundation. I let them stew for exactly 4 hours before responding with a single line. The mortgage payment is due Thursday. You have until then to decide if you want to discuss my terms. What followed was the most surreal day of my adult life. My phone rang constantly, my parents calling separately and together, Chandler alternating between tears and threats, even some relatives who'd apparently been brought into the crisis as potential mediators. I didn't answer any of the calls. Instead, I went about my normal Tuesday routine, attended a virtual board meeting for a startup I'd invested in, reviewed portfolios with my financial advisor, and had lunch with my real friends, successful, ambitious people who knew exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished. The contrast was stark. In my real life, I was respected, valued, and genuinely liked for my intelligence and achievements. In my family life, I'd been accepting crumbs of basic human decency while funding their entire existence. By Wednesday, the desperation in their messages had reached peak intensity. Mom left a voicemail where she cried actual tears, begging me to think about the family and not destroy everything over hurt feelings. Dad sent a text promising to work something out if I'd just be reasonable about the situation. But it was Chandler's Wednesday evening message that revealed how deep their denial really ran. Instead of acknowledging any wrongdoing, she'd somehow convinced herself that I was the villain in this story. She accused me of manipulating the family, playing sick games, and using money as a weapon to hurt people who love me. People who love me. The delusion was breathtaking. Thursday morning arrived with the precision of a cosmic timer. I woke up knowing that in approximately 6 hours their mortgage payment would be declined for insufficient funds. The account I'd been secretly funding was now empty, and their own savings had been depleted to help Chandler with her house purchase. At 10 a.m., my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was a conference call with all 3 of them on the line, their voices tight with barely controlled panic. Brielle, Dad began, his tone carefully modulated to sound reasonable rather than desperate. We need to talk about this situation like adults. I agree, I replied calmly. Are you ready to discuss my terms? Your terms are unreasonable, Mom interjected. You can't expect us to humiliate ourselves publicly because you're upset about some family dynamics. Some family dynamics. 3 years of systematic emotional abuse reduced to some family dynamics. Let me make sure I understand, I said, settling back in my chair. You think it's unreasonable for me to expect apologies for being mocked and dismissed, but it was perfectly reasonable for you to accept thousands of dollars from a secret benefactor without questioning where it came from. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear someone's nervous breathing through the phone. Chandler finally spoke, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. We didn't know it was you. That's exactly the problem, I replied. You didn't know because you never bothered to really see me. You were so convinced of my failure that you couldn't imagine I might be successful. You were so invested in your narrative about the golden child, and the disappointment that you missed 3 years of evidence to the contrary. So what happens now? Dad asked, and I could hear the defeat in his voice. I looked at my watch. 3 hours until their mortgage payment was due. Now, you decide who you want to be, I said. You can keep being the people who mock their daughter while spending her money, or you can become the family who learn something from their mistakes. But either way, you're going to learn what your choices actually cost. I hung up the phone and waited for them to discover what consequences really felt like. The mortgage payment bounced at exactly 2:47 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. I know the precise time because the bank called my parents immediately, and Dad left me a voicemail at 2:52 p.m. that was equal parts panic and rage. By 3 p.m., Chandler had discovered her credit cards were declined when she tried to buy moving supplies. By 3:30 p.m., their electricity company had sent a final notice for the overdue bill I was no longer paying. The beautiful thing about financial consequences is their absolute honesty. Numbers don't care about golden children or family hierarchies. When the money stops flowing, reality arrives with mathematical precision. My phone exploded with increasingly frantic messages as my family discovered the true scope of their dependence on my secret support. The mysterious estate settlement that had covered their utilities gone. The investment dividends that had been padding Chandler's checking account vanished. The anonymous trust fund payments that had been supplementing their mortgage evaporated. For 3 years I'd been their invisible safety net. Now they were learning what it felt like to fall. By Friday morning they'd moved through denial and anger, and landed squarely in bargaining territory. Mom sent a long email explaining how they'd always loved me, and never meant to hurt my feelings. Dad called to discuss working out a payment plan for their immediate financial crisis. Chandler sent a series of increasingly desperate texts about how she'd lose her dream house if I didn't restore her credit line before Monday's closing deadline. But the most revealing response came from an unexpected source: my extended family. Word had leaked about our financial disagreement, and suddenly I was receiving calls from aunts and uncles who wanted to understand what was really happening. That's when I learned something that shouldn't have surprised me but did. Our entire extended family had been secretly contributing to Chandler's lifestyle for years. Aunt Rebecca had been sending her $100 monthly for emergencies. Uncle Tom had quietly paid off her student loans the previous year. Cousin Jessica had been covering Chandler's health insurance premiums. They'd all been supporting her while watching my parents mock me for being unable to support myself. The irony was so thick it was almost absurd. "We thought you knew," Aunt Rebecca told me during a particularly awkward phone conversation. "We assumed your parents were helping you too, just more privately." More privately? As if there were varying degrees of family financial support, and I'd somehow gotten the understated version. By Saturday, exactly 1 week after my revelation, my family was facing their first real financial crisis in 3 years. Chandler's closing was scheduled for Monday morning, but without access to the credit lines I'd been secretly maintaining, she couldn't prove her financial stability to the mortgage company. My parents faced their first mortgage payment default in decades, along with mounting utility bills and credit card debt they'd accumulated, assuming their mysterious income would continue indefinitely. That's when they finally broke. The email arrived Sunday evening, sent from my father's account but clearly written by all three of them together. It was titled, "We're sorry," and contained exactly what I'd demanded: full acknowledgement of their treatment of me, specific examples of their dismissive behavior, and concrete commitments to change their family dynamics. But more importantly, it contained something I hadn't expected: genuine insight into their motivations. Mom admitted she'd been threatened by my independence and success because it highlighted her own unrealized ambitions. Dad confessed he'd mocked my achievements because my success in technology made him feel obsolete in his traditional accounting career. Chandler acknowledged she'd encouraged their dismissive attitude toward me because it maintained her position as the family's primary focus. They weren't just apologizing for their behavior, they were explaining the psychology behind it. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like they were actually seeing me as a real person rather than a character in their family drama. The public apology came next, posted on our family's group social media page where all our relatives could see it. They acknowledged they'd failed to recognize and appreciate Brielle's achievements and had allowed family dynamics to become unfairly skewed. They admitted they'd been wrong to dismiss her contributions to our family, and committed to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was public, permanent, and specific enough to satisfy my requirements. On Monday morning, I made 2 phone calls that changed everything. The first was to my family's mortgage company, where I arranged to bring their account current with a payment that would clear that afternoon. The second was to Chandler's mortgage broker, where I verified her financial capacity for the house purchase by providing documentation of her restored credit lines. But I also made a third call that they didn't know about. I contacted a family therapist who specialized in toxic family dynamics and arranged for 6 months of prepaid sessions for all 4 of us. When I called them that evening to inform them that their financial support had been restored, I also delivered my final conditions: monthly family therapy sessions, quarterly family meetings where we'd discuss our relationships honestly, and an end to the golden child dynamic that had poisoned our interactions for decades. "This isn't about the money," I told them during our first conference call in a week, where no one was crying or yelling. It never was about the money. It was about respect, recognition, and basic human decency. The money was just the only language powerful enough to get your attention. Chandler closed on her house Tuesday morning, but now she knew exactly where her down payment assistance had really come from. My parents kept their home, but now they understood who'd been keeping them there. And I finally had what I'd been seeking for 3 years: a family that saw me for who I really was. The therapy sessions revealed layers of dysfunction I hadn't even recognized. We learned about birth order psychology, financial trauma from my parents' own childhoods, and the ways that societal expectations about women and success had warped our family's values. We discovered that their dismissive treatment of me had been a defense mechanism against feeling inadequate about their own achievements. Most importantly, we learned how to be a real family instead of a hierarchy. Today, 18 months later, our relationships have transformed completely. Chandler and I actually talk regularly, not as competing daughters, but as sisters who understand each other's struggles and celebrate each other's victories. My parents ask my advice on major decisions and include me in family planning as an equal voice rather than an afterthought. The money still flows, but openly now. They know where it comes from, and they express genuine gratitude for my support. More importantly, they've started contributing their own unique value to our family dynamic. Mom's emotional intelligence, Dad's practical wisdom, and Chandler's social connections have all become resources we share, rather than weapons we use against each other. But here's what I learned that might surprise you: the revenge wasn't what healed our family. The honesty was. When I forced them to confront their behavior and acknowledge my worth, I created space for real relationships to develop. When they had to face consequences for treating me poorly, they learned to value treating me well. Sometimes people need to lose something before they can appreciate what they had. Sometimes families need to break before they can heal properly. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the only one strong enough to save everyone else, including from themselves. Looking back, I don't regret the 3 years I spent invisible. That experience taught me who I really was when stripped of external validation. It showed me the difference between being loved and being valued, and it gave me the strength to demand better for myself and my family. The house Chandler bought with my secret assistance has become our family gathering place where we meet monthly for dinners that include everyone equally. The mortgage I saved for my parents has become a symbol of how family support should work, openly, gratefully, and reciprocally. And the business I built while they mocked my failures has become a legacy I'm proud to share with the family who finally learned to see me. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? Have you experienced that moment when someone realizes they've been wrong about your worth all along? Drop a comment below and share your 45 story, because I know I'm not the only one who's ever been invisible in their own family. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama with unexpected endings. Share this video with anyone who's ever felt overlooked or undervalued. Sometimes we all need reminding that our worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Thank you for listening to my story, and for understanding that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay invisible. Here's to families that learn to grow, relationships that learn to heal, and the courage it takes to demand the respect we deserve. Remember, you are never too small to make a big impact, and you are never too quiet to have a powerful voice.